Hey, so today I thought I'd do something a little bit different. A while ago I did a video on whether or not J.K. Rowling is allowed to have an opinion on her own series, and people really enjoyed the literary theory that I used in that video, which I was really surprised by. So I'm not going to go full-blown lit theory in this video, I don't think, but I am going to be doing a gender reading of L.M. Montgomery's Anne of Green Gables. I'm not going to be giving a plot summary, because I feel like to get the most out of this video, you need to have read Anne of Green Gables. A very brief refresher, Anne is a orphan who goes to live with a elderly brother and sister. Originally, Marilla and Matthew wanted a little boy so he could help out on the farm, but they end up with Anne and decide to keep her for various reasons. It's set on Prince Edward Island in Canada at the turn of the century, which is quite a conservative and rural community. It maintains a number of social structures which restrict women to traditional and stereotypical roles. And at the turn of the century, there were a lot of shifting attitudes towards these traditional roles. For instance, you have a character called Miss Rachel Lynn who thinks women should have the right to vote, but thinks it is preposterous that a woman could be a minister or a teacher. And Anne occupies a really interesting position in the deconstruction of femininity. She both really breaks the mold of restrictions upon young girls, but at the same time she strives to be seen as the perfect little girl with domestic skill or dexterity. Now, because femininity and masculinity, gender, is a societal construction, the definitions of these things can differ from culture to culture and time period to time period. So I think it's important that we define what exactly we mean by masculine or feminine. Susan Lair characterized masculinity in children's literature of that time period to be aggressive, loud, opinionated, active, independent, strong, naturally intelligent, whereas girls are portrayed as nice, accommodating, sweet, emotional, dependent, shy, and passive. Anne Shirley is introduced as a very talkative little girl, and this is apparent right away when you are introduced to her character in her conversations with Matthew. And it is notable that she is the active one in these conversations and Matthew is passive. Anne has a very chatty nature and a very extended vocabulary, and that was not the norm for little girls in Avonlea in 1908. And in fact, a number of her characteristics are at odds with the definition of femininity in much of children's literature. She contrasts the other girls in the book in that she is strong and independent and opinionated. At a number of points in the novel, she very strongly expresses her opinions and shows anger, particularly towards Miss Rachel Lynn. And in fact, Anne goes on to directly challenge gender roles, and she asks questions about why women can't be teachers and ministers when, you know, they can be the best person for the job. As she matures, Anne consciously refuses to conform to these gender roles. Age 16, she gains her teaching license in just 1 year, which normally takes students 2 years to gain. She is awarded the Avery Scholarship in English, which means she can go on to gain a Bachelor of Arts and become a teacher. Anne also equals and then surpasses her academic rival Gilbert Blythe. Throughout the novel, there has been this rivalry between the two, and very stubbornly, another more male-orientated trait, refuses to accept Gilbert's apology for when he teased her when they were younger. Even when Gilbert saves her, she refuses to step down and is adamant that they will never ever be friends. Anne is a young woman who is determined to save herself. So far, Anne seems to be an incredibly subversive and strong female character. She really lacks domestic dexterity, and traditionally female roles they don't really work for her. She burns pies and she messes up cake recipes. However, her lack of these skills are not valued in her community, and through the influence of others we see the construction of her more feminine identity. In her really influential work, The Second Sex, Simone de Beauvoir argues that gender is a social construction. One is not born, but rather becomes a woman. This suggests that it is not biology that makes us women, it is a social construction. Gender is fluid and unstable, it is not fixed and reliable. And this socialization is really apparent in Anne of Green Gables as she is transformed into an acceptable version of the feminine. And this occurs through her interaction with other female influences. There is a really great article called Doing Gender, which talks about the influential and interactional element of gender. We need to look at the other influences in Anne's life, and I think a really good example of an influence is Marilla, who is her adoptive mother. So Marilla clearly has a very essentialist view of gender, and essentialist basically means that there are clear and strict differences between male and female. This notion of essentialism can be used to articulate various kinds of gender stereotypes. For instance, the idea that a male body is strong and a female body is weak. And this is really apparent when Marilla talks about why she wanted a male child. She specifies that they wanted a boy because he would be strong and be able to help on the farm. Through Marilla's essentialist lens, being strong and being male are synonymous. Even though requesting a boy child would have no guarantee that the child would be a skilled labourer, Marilla just believes that asking for a boy is shorthand for getting a skilled labourer. But in other ways, Marilla really doesn't understand the feminine traits of the time. For instance, Anne really wants a dress with puffed sleeves, but Marilla doesn't think this is acceptable, even though all the other little girls have puffed sleeve dresses. And this shows Marilla's lack of understanding in the shifting nature of gender norms. For instance, I think a lot of us know that pink used to be a colour for babies who were assigned male at birth, whereas now it is totally swapped around and pink is very much a girl's colour. An example of Marilla's conflicting views on gender is when Anne decides to wear flowers in her hat. She says, "All I want you to do is stop being ridiculous and behave like other little girls." But of course that is exactly what Anne's trying to do. She is trying to fit in with the other girls. Desperately wants to fit in, and she is told that conforming to this gender regime will guarantee her things. It guarantees her friendship with Diana. This is really interesting in that Anne is not being encouraged to be a good person. She is being encouraged to be a good girl. It could be argued that Anne's desire to fit in and be feminine undermines any feminist reading of the novel, and I really disagree with that. This blend of masculine and feminine traits offers an alternative to tomboy figures like Jo March in Little Women. And nor does she actively transgress gender roles like George of the famous 5 books. Jo March is a total tomboy, and George rejects the idea of even wanting to be a girl. Like, George straight up says, "I do not want to be a girl." And the tomboy figure is really rewarding in feminist theory. It is girls deliberately going against gender norms and female passivity. However, Anne Shirley emphasises that you don't need to be a tomboy to be subversive. You can be masculine and feminine. And a lot of people have drawn comparisons between the likes of Jo March and Anne Shirley, comparing the fact that Jo March doesn't get married at the end of the novel, whereas L.M. Montgomery satisfied the reader's desire to see her marry Gilbert. I don't think Anne having a relationship undermines her being a strong female character, and I would also point out that Jo March gets married in the next edition of Little Women. So shut up. Anne is not aromantic, nor does she need to be a subversive female character. Rather, I would align her with figures such as Jane Eyre. There are a lot of comparisons that can be drawn between Anne of Green Gables and Jane Eyre, and I think that's something that's really interesting to explore. So Jane only enters a marriage when she has her own economic stability, very similar to Anne. Jane Eyre is so often considered the quintessential feminist text, and when you compare that to 21st century standards, it doesn't really hold up. But of course, when you consider it within the contexts of Victorian England, the novel is definitely subversive. And finally, as I mentioned previously, Anne is awarded the Avery Scholarship. However, Anne decides to stay at Green Gables so she can take care of Marilla. This initially appears to be a rejection of the opportunity to enter the male-dominated realm of education. But this isn't done for feminine caregiving reasons. Gilbert makes a similar sacrifice in giving up his teaching position. Anne's decision to stay at Green Gables does not exemplify feminine gender roles. It exemplifies goodness and generosity. And above all else, it was Anne's decision to stay at Green Gables. Choice is a pillar of modern-day feminist ideology, and it is all about women making their own damn choices, and that is exactly what Anne does. So Anne doesn't entirely subvert gender roles, but she certainly confuses and blurs and confounds them. She showcases the flimsiness in the divisions between boys and girls. She embodies masculine traits and feminine traits, and she refuses to conform to the restrictions that are put upon her. She is outspoken and intelligent and passionate, and she possesses the ability to stand up for herself. And ultimately, Anne makes her own decisions. And that's what feminism is about. Freedom of choice. Anne begins the novel as an inspiring little girl, and she matures into an empowering young woman who takes charge of her own life. And she can do just that in puffed sleeves and flowers in her hat. Thank you if you made it all the way to the end of this video. I'm not sure if anyone will. I really enjoyed filming this, and I really love talking about this type of stuff. If you would like me to do more of this stuff, let me know. Do you agree with what I said about Anne of Green Gables? I really don't like the cover I have of this book. Yeah, did you agree? Did you disagree with some of the stuff I said? Have you read Anne of Green Gables? What did you think about it? Be sure to let me know if you want more of this kind of nonsense.